few questions that I'm going to kind of throw your way, and I guess we can move on to some Q&A in the audience. I'm going to just start very basic with, what do you believe is the most challenging aspect of baking at the current time, whether it's technical, legal, or financial?
Anyone first?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure. Pick it up.
Sure. I think there's a couple challenges that are in the space right now. The biggest challenge, I think, is how do I bake reliably with private keys that are stored in a hardware security module. You know, there's this, like I talked about in my talk, there's this trade-off between availability and uptime and the security of the private keys. And I think that it's tough to make those decisions, and it requires a lot of security expertise. And then the other thing that I think we should improve is something that Awa mentioned in her talk, which is about having more than one key, not necessarily needing the same private key to vote and do on-chain governance that you use to bake.
Great.
I guess Luke has covered most of the technical challenges behind baking. I would say one is not technically related would be regulations, or how. So right now I have a lot of questions. I'm sure a lot of other bakers may have the questions of what is the rewards, what is the, how do you tax these things, how will regulators react to this new business model, which is actually not the same as revenue, as inflation. So yeah, I would say that is one of the biggest challenges.
And I'll even throw in one that's different than both of these, which is many of the delegation services have become over-delegated, meaning that we just don't have enough bond in order to cover all the delegation rights that we've received. And so constantly trying to either come up with self-bond or create a baking as a service or bond pool model has been a real interesting challenge over the last few months.
Let's actually roll into another question right from there, which is, do you feel that there's any sort of centralization through, say, the use of AWS tools, like clients, or jurisdiction? I've also had some feedback, it's not necessarily backed, but that more people are going to friendly jurisdictions, which creates some sort of geographical centralization. So,
It's a very interesting question. I think there's two kinds of centralization. The infrastructure centralization that is a little bit concerning is we do not want a monoculture where every baker runs on a single cloud provider. I think that's important to the strength and safety of the network, that we promote home baking. I think home baking is a great approach to decentralizing the network. And we also promote solutions that work with all the cloud providers and all the infrastructure hosting companies. So that's one thing. And then I think in terms of regulatory decentralization, it's also a challenge because I think in the US, there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty about whether you need a money transmitter license or not to operate a bakery. And I think having some regulatory clarity could really help to allow bakers to flourish in all countries.
I'm actually finding it really cool that Tezos has almost 500 bakers distributed around the world. And I'm not that concerned about geographical centralization at the moment, because we even have a bakery in Zealand, as far as I know, or in these very unique geographical areas, which I think other networks are actually struggling with achieving. So.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting if I think about where are the geographical locations of the largest bakers, certainly from Switzerland to the United States to Finland to the Asian bakeries. That's pretty interesting. It's kind of all over the world at this point in time.
all right. So now that you're on video, are you for or against increasing the roll size?
Or decreasing the roll size?
Decreasing, right?
Or-
Yeah. I'm personally for decreasing the roll size because I think it democratizes the baking process. Now smaller bakers can join the ecosystem. So I think I'm optimistic we'll see it grow beyond the 500. It's already very well decentralized, but I'm optimistic we'll see it decentralize even more with the smaller roll sizes.
So we voted for decrease in roll size, and the reasons were manifold. One of the major reasons is because technically it's not that much of a change. But on the other hand, it provides certain benefits to communities, such as smaller holders are now eligible to bake. And from our experience, baking is one of those tasks that actually teaches you one of the most efficient ways of learning about Tezos protocol is to become a baker. However, I personally would have not voted for it simply because we're changing from metric to imperial system. So now we have to divide. Before it was you divide by 10. That's how you get the.
So you would have
rows.
taken 1,000, but not 8,000. Okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
but at 8,000 now we have to. I'm pretty sure in here it is not big of an issue like with imperial system, but.
Well, we may. We also voted in favor of Athens A, and I believe that we should continue to decrease roll size, and I wouldn't be at all surprised or against trying to get down to 1,000 at some point in time. I feel, there's always going to be some folks who are not going to want to bake, and those customers are the kinds of folks that delegation services are going to be able to serve over the long term. And the more people that we can get to bake and decentralize our protocol, the better off we all are over time.
Can I say something else? So something I noticed from voices in the community during Athens voting is that it seemed that there was a misconception of what the impact would be. So for example, some makers were kind of concerned about losing delegation and such. But I think that would only be true if people delegate only because of the roll size. Whereas I think a lot of people realized after baking that it's just a lot of work and a lot of time that goes into it. And that's why I think a decrease of the roll size doesn't really impact your delegations that much. And on the other hand, another reason why we voted for is because we thought at this moment in time, it was extremely important to set a good precedent in on-chain governance.
All right. And I would say for the last question I have for you is, what are you looking forward to most in 2019 for baking?
The thing I'm looking forward to most is the institutional custodians that are going to be coming online in 2019, and I think that's going to bring a lot of institutional interest into the Tezos network, and I think we're already starting to see some of that happen, and so I'm really excited about that.
That is actually really exciting. I think large companies such as Coinbase, we have a lot of experience dealing with customer interfaces. That's going to be really interesting. It's going to become a lot more competitive, which is good. On the other hand, I think I'm more excited on bakers starting to leverage other interesting things, such as maybe they can start differentiating themselves using smart contracts and like customize their services one way or another to differentiate themselves.
And I think what I'm most excited about is one of the kind of glossed over topics of the Athens voting process here is that the developers who are submitting this change, which is Nomadic Labs, are actually they're submitting an invoice with that change to actually get paid from the blockchain when that change goes real. Now, we all know that to demonstrate how this functionality works, they're only charging 100 Tez, which is a couple of bottles of wine in France, I think. But the reality is that I suspect that this notion of the chain rewarding the dev teams who submit and successfully progress through the voting process is going to probably open up a kind of land grab, Wild West, crazy kind of land rush into Tezos from a developer perspective. And I think I wouldn't be surprised in 2 or 3 or 4 cycles from now, we have 15 or 20 competing proposals, all of which are going to be very different from each other because devs are going to see it as an opportunity to possibly get rewarded. Now, we may go crazy on that, and then it'll come back down to something more rational. But I think in 2019, the back half of the year is going to be pretty crazy with protocol proposals.
That's kind of my favorite too. Actually, I do have one more, which would be, what are your thoughts on the current quorum and supermajority and participation rates in voting?
I think it's fantastic that Athens A was able to move into the exploratory phase, and so I'm super excited to see what happens next. And I'm optimistic that hopefully we get to the supermajority and we actually get to the testing phase. So I'm super excited about that. I think it's been a really positive experience so far.
I have to say I was quite impressed by the amount of participation we see so far in on-chain governance. It's, believe it or not, it's a lot of entities you have to coordinate, so you have to I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people in the community who have been relentlessly chasing those people to tell them please participate and such. And I think it's just step by step. In the future, people would just do it by default. But at the beginning, it is normal that it takes extra effort to coordinate all of these agents around the world to vote. So I'm pretty impressed by that right now.
All right then. Do we have any questions in the audience? Javon, over here.
One question? You guys got all that?
Did we have a question over
That
here?
right here? Okay, cool.
This is the time to grill them.
Hi. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of applications do you expect to be developed on the Tezos platform? And if you look at the universe of possible blockchains that developers can build apps on top of, how do you see Tezos differentiating yourself compared to, say, Ethereum or Definity or any of the other 10 smart contracting platforms out there?
So I'll take a first run at that if I can. So from the very earliest days of reading the white paper and becoming involved in the community, I always thought of Tezos as differentiating itself around its ability to deliver, supreme security to folks who wanted to build high-value smart contracts on top of the blockchain. So if you're dealing with financial instruments, insurance instruments, things that have a significant cost model associated with it, and if they were to either be hacked or to have incorrect code in them, could generate a lot of negative returns. I feel like the Tezos architecture and the choice of programming languages is perfectly suited for those kinds of contracts. And coming up next, we're going to hear from some of the developers who are building those kinds of things.
Can I go next?
Yeah.
So I second that. In addition to some inherent properties in smart contracting language as there's a smart contract platform, I think I will go a little bit beyond that. And this is based on some stories that Jacob shared from other panels. It's the fact that there are people who are looking into Tezos, not that much about smart contracting platform at the moment, but more on the fact that Tezos has an on-chain governance process. So there is more certainty on that the protocol will evolve, not the fact that at some point whoever is leading development just drop the ball and then later on you're stuck with that platform that is not going to be scalable or anything. And this is the example of, for example, the tokenized real estate. There's is a case that TQ is leading right now. And then this guy was basically saying, I think at this moment, I prefer to tokenize my assets on Tezos because I'm certain there's a governance process in place that I know that the protocol will evolve somehow, which might not be perfect in the beginning, but still, there's something better than not having any governance.
Yeah, I just kind of second what I was talking about. There's a company, Elevated Returns, that is currently securitizing $1 billion of real estate on the Tezos blockchain. And one of their key criteria for selecting Tezos over Ethereum was that Tezos has an on-chain governance process. And so they're confident that the chain will be able to upgrade and evolve, and it won't have these contentious forks that we've seen in the Bitcoin and Ethereum ecosystems. So I think that's a really positive aspect of Tezos. And then also, I will say I'm really excited about some of the formal verification and proofs that are happening right now on smart contracts on Tezos. So for example, I know Arthur Brightman has been working on a formally verified multi-sig smart contract, and I think that will enable a lot of business settlement and on-chain contract type activity between businesses and individuals. So I'm excited about that.
That's great. Do we have any other questions in the audience?
Ryan?
Yes. Obviously, any of you can answer this, but I was really interested in your comments, Jonas, regarding where we are in the state of blockchain today, specifically the requirement in the real world for trust, and the fact that blockchain enables us to mathematically obviate the need for that trust. As we sit here today, there have really been, across the whole blockchain spectrum, very few real-world significant uses of blockchain with billions of dollars being transacted, as a for instance, such as there is in a typical database application like in banking, where we see, or the FedWire, where we see trillions of dollars move every single day. What is it going to require, in your opinion, interested in all of your opinions, what's it going to require be required for blockchain to kind of pierce those shields and break through so that we do get some significant usage on the blockchain, enough to make a difference. Right now, I think you said we haven't, you said 20 years from now or
Sure.
something.
I mean, I personally just think we're really early in this whole story, right? We're still kind of in the first inning of the blockchain ballgame. And the number of projects that have launched since Bitcoin is incredible. It's unlikely that most of those projects are going to survive. There's obviously a whole bunch of uncertainty on what's legitimate and not legitimate in the space today. And even though those blockchains themselves have cryptographic keys for the trustless infrastructure that I talked about, it doesn't mean that we can actually trust those chains yet, right? So I see that whole evolution and culling of what is going to be a successful blockchain over the next decade, moving forward.
Is there a specific technological breakthrough that's needed, in your opinion? If we had X or Y or Z, then
I don't have one off the top of my
So
head.
the analogy I like to use is it's like e-commerce was in the late 90s. I mean, in the late 90s, the internet was very immature, and there were only a few online retailers. A lot of them failed, like Pets.com, who could never be profitable shipping bags of kitty litter to your doorstep. But out of the ashes of that, we saw a lot of successful e-commerce players like Amazon that made the user experience really easy, and that with 2-day shipping, that really revolutionized things. So I think what's key to getting beyond that barrier is the user experience has to be front and center. We have to develop applications that are super easy to use, that disrupt traditional financial instruments. And that's what I think will be key to kind of coming out of this, this early phase and moving to the utility phase of blockchain.
Well, I'm being told that we're out of time, so thank you for coming out, and let's give a round of applause for Luke, Awa, and Jonas.
Thank you.